She was fired in tears until the billionaire said, "Then marry me instead." Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain fell hard over downtown Chicago, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and gray. Inside the marble lobby of the high-rise, Elena Carter stood frozen, clutching a cardboard box filled with the fragments of her career, one framed photo, a dying plant, and her employee badge snapped in half. Her supervisor's voice still echoed behind her. "You are dismissed, Elena, effective immediately. You defied an order from the board." Elena's throat tightened. "I did not defy anyone. I refused to sign a fake report. You are lying to investors." "Enough," the woman snapped, waving her away as the security guard approached. "Leave before I call the police." The glass doors swung open. Cold winds slapped against Elena's wet cheeks. She stepped out, her heels splashing through puddles on the sidewalk. People walked past, indifferent, their umbrellas floating like dark wings above their heads. She wanted to scream, to disappear, to rewind time just 1 hour before she had lost everything. But fate was already moving toward her. A black car rolled to a stop at the curb. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out, his umbrella held steady despite the wind. His tailored suit was untouched by the rain, but his eyes, gray, calm, and unreadable, caught on Elena. It was Adrian Kane, the billionaire CEO who owned the very building she had just been thrown out of. "Elena Carter?" His voice was low but carried over the rain. "Why are you standing here crying?" She swallowed hard, stunned. I just got fired." "For what reason?" She hesitated, then blurted out the truth. "Because I refused to forge a signature on a contract that would cheat your investors. They said integrity has no place in this company." Adrian's gaze sharpened. He looked up toward the gleaming windows above them, then back at her, his jaw set. The rain ran down the edge of his umbrella, dripping near her trembling hands. "You chose honesty over survival," he said quietly. "That is rare." Elena gave a broken laugh. "Honesty does not pay rent, Mr. Kane." Something flickered in his expression, part anger, part admiration. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, closing the umbrella between them, letting the rain soak his shoulders. "Then let me make you an offer," he said. She blinked. "An offer?" Adrian met her eyes, voice steady, deliberate. "You lost your job because you refused to lie. That kind of integrity is exactly what I need beside me right now." "I am not looking for a job," she whispered. "I am not offering one," he replied. "I am offering a proposal." The city seemed to hold its breath. "Marry me," Adrian said. "It will be a contract 6 months only. You will help me silence the board that wants me gone, and in return, I will make sure your mother's hospital bills are paid and your future is secured." Elena stared at him, speechless, her heart pounding louder than the rain. "You cannot be serious," she managed to say. Adrian tilted his head slightly. "I have never been more serious. Think of it as a business arrangement. No love, no pretense, just a deal between two people who need something the other can provide." Thunder rolled overhead. She stood there, drenched, trembling, and broke. Behind her was the world that had just humiliated her. Before her stood a man offering salvation wrapped in a contract. Her voice trembled. "And when the contract ends," Adrian's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, "then you will walk away richer, and I will owe you nothing." The raindrops fell harder, washing away her tears until she could not tell them apart. Elena looked at the man before her, the billionaire whose power could destroy or rescue anyone with a single decision, and whispered, "All right, I will do it." Adrian nodded once, his face unreadable. "Good. My driver will take you to the office tomorrow morning. We will discuss the terms." He turned to leave, but for a fleeting second, his gaze lingered on her soaked figure, fragile, furious, unbroken. Something in his chest tightened. As the car door closed behind him, Elena stood alone under the storm, clutching the box to her chest. She had just agreed to a marriage that was not real, but it was the only way to survive what came next. The next morning the storm had passed, but the air still smelled like wet concrete and regret. Elena stood in front of the tall glass doors of Kane Enterprises, her reflection small against the marble and steel. Her hair was still damp from the rain, her coat borrowed from a neighbor. She took a deep breath before the guard waved her inside. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, Adrian Kane was already waiting for her. He looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more human, but his expression was still unreadable. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said. "Did you sleep at all?" She shook her head. "Barely." He motioned for her to follow. They entered a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. A folder rested on the table. Inside was a document printed on heavy paper marriage agreement. Elena sat slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she scanned the pages. 6 months, she read aloud. Attend 5 public events as your wife. Maintain a public image of marriage. No romantic involvement. No interference in each other's personal lives. Her eyes flicked upward. "This is insane." Adrian crossed his arms. "It is necessary. My board is pushing me to marry before the end of the quarter to secure control over the company. They believe I cannot manage both empire and legacy without a family name attached. And what do you get out of this?" He smiled faintly. "Control. And a partner who will not betray me." Elena looked back down at the paper. "And what do I get?" He slid another sheet across the table. "Full payment of your mother's medical bills, a trust fund for your brother's education, and a salary for your participation." The numbers were impossible. Enough to save her family twice over. She stared at the offer, heart racing. "You think you can buy my dignity?" she asked quietly. "I am buying your time," Adrian said. "Your dignity is already intact. You prove that when you refuse to sign a lie." The room fell silent except for the hum of the city below. Elena felt cornered between survival and pride. Finally, she picked up the pen. "Where do I sign?" Adrian watched her carefully as she signed her name. When she set the pen down, he reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, but elegant. "It is just for appearances," he said, placing it in her palm. "You do not have to wear it all the time." The metal felt cold, almost heavy like the promise it carried. "Appearances," she repeated softly. "Right." Adrian straightened his tie. "Our first public appearance will be this Friday at the charity gala. My team will handle your wardrobe and etiquette training. You will start tomorrow." She nodded, still stunned by how quickly her life had shifted. As she stood to leave, Adrian's voice softened, almost human. "I know this is not easy, Elena, but you will not regret it." She looked at him, unsure if it was reassurance or a warning. "I already do," she said quietly. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, something that looked dangerously close to guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by the calm mask of a man who built empires from nothing. "See you tomorrow," he said. Outside, the winter sun was rising over the city, golden and cold. Elena walked down the steps, clutching the folder to her chest, her breath visible in the crisp air. She had just signed away 6 months of her life to a billionaire she barely knew. And for the first time since losing her job, she realized this was only the beginning. The next day began before sunrise. Elena arrived at the private estate that the contract called temporary residence. The mansion stretched across the hill like a museum, white columns, polished marble, and silence heavy enough to hear her own footsteps. A woman in a navy suit greeted her at the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Kane. I am Claire, Mr. Kane's chief of staff. I will prepare you for the upcoming events." Elena almost corrected her, but the title hung in the air like a warning. "Mrs. Kane." The first rule of the contract: pretend convincingly. Claire led her through wide hallways filled with art and old money. Maids passed quietly, their eyes downcast. At the end of the hall stood a mirror taller than Elena herself. She looked small beside it, her reflection foreign and uncertain. The next few hours blurred into transformation. A stylist trimmed her hair, a makeup artist studied her face like a canvas, and a designer fitted her for a champagne-colored gown. "Smile less," Claire advised gently. "The public expects sophistication, not warmth." Elena exhaled. "You mean they expect me to act like I belong here?" Claire met her gaze. "Exactly." By noon, she was escorted to the sitting room where Adrian waited. He looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, reading through reports on a tablet. When he lifted his eyes, he paused briefly, just long enough for her to notice. "You clean up well," he said. "I had help," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He stood and adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. Tonight is rehearsal for the charity gala. You will meet the press tomorrow. Walk beside me, speak little, smile when appropriate. I will handle the rest. Understood. And the sad with the action and with that of with the action, they walked toward the terrace overlooking the garden. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and winter rain. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Adrian broke the silence. Why did you refuse to forge that contract, Elena? You could have kept your job. She turned toward him. Because my father taught me that if you have to lie to eat, you will never taste food again without shame. Adrian studied her face, his expression unreadable. You lost everything for that belief. Then maybe it was the only thing I truly owned, she said softly. A small smile tugged at his lips, but he looked away quickly. You are unlike anyone I know. Is that a compliment? I am not sure yet. There was that and seven in an office in say the wild goys in Lake Raver. In the May side of you, in the sobly havel. Overd of sen. Before she could reply, Claire appeared again. The car is ready, sir. Adrian nodded, offering his arm. Shall we, Mrs. Kane? The words sounded smooth, practiced, but something in his eyes carried a flicker of irony, perhaps curiosity. She took his arm, her hand barely resting against the expensive fabric of his sleeve. Outside, cameras flashed as they stepped into the waiting car. The driver pulled away from the mansion gates, and Elena caught her reflection in the window. Her hair perfectly styled, her gown flawless, her face calm. But beneath the surface, her heart raced. She had stepped into a world that did not belong to her, a world where truth was currency and affection was performance. As the skyline approached, Adrian spoke without looking at her. Remember, Elena, it is all an act. We are partners, not lovers. She forced a faint smile. Do not worry, Mr. Kane. I learned my lines. He glanced at her then, just long enough for her to see something soften in his gaze. For a man who claimed not to believe in love, Adrian Kane looked as if he was starting to forget that it was only a contract. That evening, the rehearsal dinner for the charity gala filled the downtown ballroom with chandeliers and murmurs of old money. Elena stepped from the limousine first, her hand trembling slightly against the polished handle. Cameras flashed in waves of white light. Adrian followed, placing a steady hand on her back as if guiding her through a storm. Inside, music drifted from a string quartet. The air smelled of perfume, champagne, and the subtle arrogance of the rich. Every head turned toward them. Elena felt the weight of their eyes, the whispered curiosity about the mysterious woman who had suddenly become Mrs. Adrian Kane. Adrian leaned toward her without smiling. Remember what I said. Walk with confidence. You belong here tonight. She nodded, forcing her breath to steady. I am trying. They're mattered. They moved from table to table, greeting donors and investors. Adrian's composure never cracked. His handshake was firm, his tone polite but cold. Elena followed his lead, answering only when spoken to. For the first time, she understood that this marriage was not a union, but a performance one where every gesture had meaning. Halfway through the evening, a man approached with a smirk too confident to be friendly. Adrian, you did not tell us you got married, and to such a beautiful woman. Elena smiled politely. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. The man laughed. I did not know the Kane family had expanded its charity program to include personal rescues. Adrian's jaw tightened. Watch your words. Crawford raised a glass. Come on. I am just saying, not everyone marries out of love these days. Some do it for the headlines. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Before Adrian could respond, she spoke, her voice steady. Then it is a good thing I do not read headlines. I am too busy living the story. The table went silent. Adrian's eyes flicked to her, surprised but impressed. Crawford muttered something under his breath and stepped away. When they finally sat down, Adrian turned toward her. That was bold. She took a sip of water. Was it not convincing enough for our act? A small smile crossed his lips. More than convincing, maybe too real. Is Welly fire him then? For a moment, they simply watched the glittering room. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter blurred into background noise. Then Adrian's voice lowered, almost thoughtful. You handled him better than I expected. Most people in this circle break under the first insult. Elena met his gaze. I have been breaking quietly my entire life. I just learned how to hide it better. He looked at her a second longer before nodding slowly. That might be your greatest strength. Later that night, after the guests had left, They returned to the mansion. The silence in the car felt heavier than usual. Adrian stared out the window, his reflection fractured by the city lights. "You did well," he said finally. "The board will see the photos tomorrow. They will believe what they need to believe." "And what do you believe?" she asked softly. He hesitated before answering. "That I may have underestimated you." She smiled faintly. "Most people do." When the car stopped, Elena stepped out first. The marble steps gleamed under the soft glow of the porch lights. She turned back to him. "Good night, Mr. Kane." Adrian lingered in the doorway. "Good night, Mrs. Kane." She walked down the hallway to her guest room, the echo of his voice following her like a whisper she was not supposed to hear. Inside her room, she removed the borrowed jewelry and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back no longer looked like the one who had cried in the rain. She looked stronger, sharper, a woman who could play the part and maybe survive it. But as she turned off the light, a single thought crept in, one she could not shake. If this was only an act, why did it already feel too real? The following morning, the house stirred with quiet rhythm. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting soft gold across the marble floor. Elena sat at the long dining table, untouched breakfast in front of her. The silence was elegant but heavy, the kind that reminded her she did not belong. Adrian entered a few minutes later, jacket already on, tie perfectly knotted. He paused when he saw her. "You are up early." "I could not sleep," she said. "I am not used to waking up in a house where every sound echoes." He gave a small nod and took the seat across from her. "You handled yourself well last night." The board was impressed. "That is good," she said quietly, stirring her coffee. "I was only trying not to embarrass you." "You did more than that," Adrian replied. "You made them respect you." Elena looked up, meeting his gaze. "Do you respect me, Mr. Kane?" For a moment he did not answer. Then he said softly, "More than I should." "And was this on the wanting and a wannery for?" The words hung between them, unspoken and dangerous. Before she could respond, Claire entered with a folder. "Sir, here are the charity reports for this quarter." Adrian took the papers, flipping through them quickly. "Cancel my afternoon meeting. I will review this with Mrs. Kane later." Claire hesitated. "Of course, sir." When they were alone again, Elena frowned. "You want my opinion on business reports?" "I want your honesty," he said simply. "Something no one else here seems to have." He handed her a page filled with numbers and marketing projections. She scanned it, surprised by how much she understood. "This part," she said, pointing to a line. "It says donations will rise after media coverage, but there is no plan for long-term funding." It looks like a quick headline, not real change. Adrian looked at her, a slow smile forming. "You see through people faster than most analysts I pay 6 figures for." "It is just common sense," she replied. "Common sense," he repeated thoughtfully. "Maybe that is what I have been missing." The rest of the morning passed quietly. They worked side by side, discussing figures and charity plans. For the first time, Adrian looked less like a billionaire and more like a man focused, curious, occasionally distracted by the way her hair fell over her face when she read. At noon, he said, "You should eat. My cook will bring lunch." Elena smiled faintly. "I prefer making my own. It helps me think." He watched her walk toward the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back. The smell of sautéed vegetables filled the air, simple and warm. It reminded him of something he could not name, something that felt like home. When she brought 2 plates to the table, Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You made enough for both of us." "You paid for the groceries," she said. "Consider this a fair exchange." We. They ate in silence at first, but it was a comfortable silence. Then Adrian asked quietly, "What did you dream of becoming before all this?" Elena hesitated. "An architect. I like designing spaces that made people feel safe." "And what stopped you?" "Life," she said with a small laugh. "And debt." He looked at her, his voice lower now. "Maybe that can change." Before she could reply, his phone buzzed on the table. The name flashing on the screen made his jaw tighten. Rachel, his former fiancée, the one the tabloids never stopped mentioning. Elena saw the name, saw his hand tremble before he silenced the call. Something inside her shifted, a mix of curiosity and something she could not quite name. Adrian set the phone aside. "She does not matter anymore," he said. Elena gave a polite nod, but her mind whispered otherwise. As he stood to leave for a meeting, he paused at the doorway. Dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. Just us. She blinked. For business? For clarity, he said, and walked away. Elena sat alone again, staring at the empty plate, her thoughts racing. This was supposed to be a contract. Simple, professional, emotionless, but the way her heart reacted to his every word felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. That evening, the mansion glowed beneath soft amber light. The table was set for two, candles flickering against crystal glass. Elena smoothed the hem of her dress, feeling strangely nervous. This was not part of the contract. There had been no clause about private dinners or candlelight. Adrian entered the room moments later, his suit jacket draped casually over his arm. "You look different tonight," he said quietly. "I just changed my dress," she replied, trying to sound casual. "It is not the dress," he said. "It is the way you are looking at me." She looked away quickly. "I am only trying to play my part, Mr. Kane." He smiled faintly, pouring wine into her glass. "Then you are doing it perfectly." Dinner began with awkward silence. The only sounds were the soft clinks of silverware and the distant hum of the city outside. But as minutes passed, the tension softened. Adrian finally spoke. "I have been thinking about what you said this morning, about building something that lasts." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You mean the charity?" "I mean everything," he said. "I have built companies, towers, and legacies, but none of them feel stable. People around me follow money, not loyalty." She watched him, surprised by his honesty. "Maybe you are searching for something that money cannot buy." He looked at her across the table. "And what would that be?" "Peace," she said softly. "And maybe someone who sees you as more than what you own." For the first time, Adrian looked unguarded. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Do you see me that way, Elena?" The question caught her off guard. "I do not know," she admitted. "You hide behind walls so high no one can see what is inside." "Maybe I am afraid to let them," he said. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. There was something intimate about the space between them, something fragile. Adrian stood, walking toward the piano near the window. "My mother used to play this," he said, pressing a key softly. "After she died, I never touched it again." Elena approached slowly. "You play?" "It not minces about Renament." He shook his head. "Not well, but she said every key has a memory. When I hear this sound, it feels like she is still here." She hesitated, then placed her hand over his on the keys. "Then maybe you should play again." For a brief moment he did. A hesitant melody filled the room, uneven, broken, but real. When it stopped, neither of them moved. Adrian turned his head slightly, his voice low. "Why do you make me remember things I spent years trying to forget?" "Because you are still human," she whispered, "and that is not a weakness." He looked at her, eyes searching, conflicted. Then, almost without thinking, he said, "You make it very hard to keep this just business. In Ralersin the Vans de Con Self, in Little Game de Del Place in the Botter Low Self." Elena stepped back, her pulse racing. "Then maybe we should end dinner before we forget what this is." She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist gently. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking the calm. "For the first time, I am not sure where the contract ends and where you begin." Her breath caught, but she pulled her hand free. "Then find out before someone gets hurt." She walked toward the hallway, her heels echoing against the marble. When the door closed behind her, Adrian remained by the piano, staring at the keys like they held the answer. The melody he had played still lingered in the air, unfinished, unresolved, just like the feeling between them. Upstairs, Elena leaned against her door, her heart pounding. She had promised herself she would not fall for him, but love had already entered the room long before either of them realized it. The next morning, tension filled the mansion like static before a storm. Elena avoided the main hall, pretending to read in the library, but her mind kept drifting back to the night before the dinner, the piano, the way Adrian's hand had lingered in hers. She needed distance. She reminded herself that this was not love, only a contract with an expiration date. But fate had other plans. By midday, the front gates burst open. The sound of expensive heels echoed across the marble floor before the butler even announced it. A woman swept into the foyer, her perfume sharp, her smile sharper. "Rachel." Adrian's voice came from the staircase above. His expression darkened. "You should not be here." Rachel turned, eyes flashing. "You did not answer my calls." What was I supposed to think when I saw you married to someone else? Elena froze near the hallway entrance. The woman was stunning, flawless makeup, tailored dress, every inch of her screaming power and confidence. So it is true, Rachel said coldly, her gaze locking on Elena. This is the replacement? Adrian's tone hardened. Watch your words. Is Master... Rachel laughed bitterly. Oh, do not worry. I am not here to fight. I just came to tell you that the board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your resignation. Apparently, they do not trust a man who hides behind a fake marriage. Elena's heart sank. A fake marriage? She whispered before she could stop herself. Rachel's smirk widened. Oh, you did not know? How adorable. Adrian's voice snapped like ice. That is enough, Rachel. She stepped closer to him. You built an empire on control, Adrian, but you cannot control feelings. Not hers, not mine, not even your own. He turned away, his jaw clenched. Get out! Rachel's heels clicked once more against the marble. Be careful, Adrian. The truth always finds its way out. When the door slammed shut, silence fell heavy between them. Elena finally found her voice. Was she telling the truth? Adrian looked at her, guilt flickering across his face. Not entirely. Then tell me which part was a lie, she demanded. He hesitated, then said quietly, the board does want proof of stability. The marriage was supposed to help with that, but I never meant for it to hurt you. Elena felt her chest tighten. You should have told me. I wanted to, he said. But every time I looked at you, it stopped feeling like a lie. His words only made it worse. So I was just another business move, she said, her voice breaking. He stepped forward. Elena, please. Do not, she said sharply. Do not call my name like it means something. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You offered me honesty. You said this was a partnership built on trust, and yet you hid the truth from me the entire time. Adrian's expression fractured for the first time, the mask slipping away. I did not plan this. You changed everything. Then you should have told me before I believed it was real, she said. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Adrian stood alone in the vast foyer, the chandelier light catching the edge of his reflection on the polished floor. He wanted to follow her, to explain, but the weight of his silence held him still. Outside, Elena stepped into the gray afternoon, the cold air biting her skin. The ring on her finger suddenly felt heavier than metal. It felt like betrayal. She pulled it off and placed it on the nearest marble step. Contracts can end, she whispered, but lies, they linger. As she walked away from the mansion, the sky began to darken. For the first time, Adrian Kane felt what it meant to lose something that money could never buy back. The next few days felt like a blur of headlines and silence. Every newspaper in Chicago carried the same story. Billionaire Adrian Kane's marriage under fire. Was it all a lie? Elena read it once and threw the paper away. She was staying at a small apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place where no one knew her name. She spent her mornings looking for work and her nights caring for her mother, who still believed her daughter had married for love. When her phone rang that Friday morning, she ignored it until the fifth call in a row flashed the same name. Claire, Adrian's assistant. Elena, Claire said breathlessly when she finally answered. You need to turn on the television right now. Elena reached for the remote, her hands shaking. The news anchor's voice filled the tiny apartment. Breaking story from Kane Enterprises. CEO Adrian Kane has publicly confronted allegations of fraud and manipulation from his board of directors. At a live conference this morning, he made a surprising declaration. The screen cut to Adrian standing at a podium, cameras flashing around him. His face was pale but calm. I will not deny my mistakes, he said, but I will not allow lies to define the truth. The woman I married did not trick me into anything. If anyone used someone, it was me. And for that, I take full responsibility. Gasps rippled through the reporters. One shouted, Are you confirming the marriage was real? The 17 you sell from 17 is on. Adrian's voice did not waver. The contract may have started as business, but the love that grew from it was never fake. I tried to protect my company by pretending my heart was untouchable. I was wrong. Elena froze, unable to breathe. Claire's voice echoed through the phone, trembling. He just risked everything, Elena. The board is furious, but he does not care. On the screen, Adrian continued, My resignation is on the table if that is what it takes to make this right. But before I step down, I have something to say to one person, Elena Carter. He looked straight at the cameras, eyes steady. You were never part of my empire. You were the only part of my life that was real. And if you can hear this, I am sorry. The microphone picked up his last words clearly. I love you. The room seemed to shrink around her. Elena covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. Her mother stirred from the sofa, confused. Sweetheart, what is happening? Elena whispered. He told the truth. Hours later, outside the glass tower of Kane Enterprises, a crowd had gathered. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and employees watched from the windows. Inside, Adrian stood before the board, papers spread across the table. Do what you must, he said. But I will not build this company on deception anymore. One of the directors scowled. You just destroyed your career for a woman. Adrian met his gaze calmly. Then maybe it is time I remember what a career is worth without a soul. He turned and walked out, ignoring the chaos behind him. By the time he reached the front lobby, rain was already falling. He stepped outside without an umbrella, his hair soaked, his face unreadable. Across the street, a taxi stopped. The door opened slowly. Elena stepped out. Her coat was damp, her hands trembling, but her eyes, those steady, kind eyes, met his without hesitation. You really should not stand in the rain, she said softly. He smiled faintly. It seems to be our thing. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, You ruined everything for me. I know, he said, and I would do it again. Her voice cracked. You told the world the truth. I owed it to you. The rain fell harder, washing away the noise of the crowd, the cameras, the past. Adrian took a step closer. Elena, I cannot change how this began, but I can promise that if you stay, there will never be another contract between us, only honesty. Elena's tears mixed with the rain. Then start by asking me again, she said. He blinked. Asking what? She smiled through her tears. To marry you. Adrian's breath caught. He took her hands in his voice low but clear. Elena Carter, will you marry me this time? For real? And was sometime, was someday. Today. The cameras caught everything. Her laugh, her tears, and the moment she nodded, yes, she whispered, this time I will. A month later, Chicago was waking to spring. The city had traded its gray skies for sunlight, and with it came whispers of redemption. Every magazine that once printed fake marriage scandal now carried a new headline, The Billionaire Who Chose Love Over Power. At the rooftop garden of the renovated Kane Foundation building, white roses lined the aisle. Only a few close friends, staff members, and family were invited. The air was filled with quiet music, soft laughter, and the smell of rain-soaked blossoms. Elena stood near the archway, her dress simple but elegant, her hair loose in gentle waves. The ring Adrian had once given her as part of the contract had been melted down and remade a symbol of what was gone and what had begun again. When Adrian appeared at the end of the aisle, time seemed to still. He was not the man who once hid behind walls of pride and money. The weight in his eyes was gone, replaced by warmth and something deeper, peace. He walked toward her slowly, every step measured, until he was close enough to whisper, I did not think I would ever deserve this. Elena smiled softly. You did not have to deserve it. You just had to be honest. And makes it as a reptome, the officiant began the vows, his voice carrying over the gentle wind. Adrian's hands trembled slightly as he took hers. I once believed love was a liability, he said, his words steady but full of emotion. But you showed me that it is the only truth that does not depreciate. I do not promise perfection, Elena. I only promise honesty. Her eyes glistened as she replied, I once thought I needed to protect my heart from people like you. But you taught me that forgiveness is not weakness, it is strength. I promise to keep seeing the man behind the name, even when the world only sees the billionaire. The crowd was silent except for a few quiet sobs. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Adrian leaned forward, their lips meeting in a kiss that erased everything that came before the lies. The contracts, the pain. Around them, the city lights shimmered like a sea of witnesses. When they pulled apart, the applause was soft but heartfelt. Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. Even the reporters standing discreetly at a distance lowered their cameras, too moved to interrupt the moment. Later that evening, under the glow of string lights and champagne bubbles, Adrian took Elena's hand as they walked to the edge of the rooftop. Below them, the skyline stretched endlessly steel and glass against a sky turning violet with dusk. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was the original marriage contract, now yellowed at the edges. Without a word, he tore it in half, then let the pieces scatter into the wind. Elena laughed softly. Finally ending the paperwork? He smiled. No, just making sure there is nothing left between us but truth. She rested her head against his shoulder. Then let us start something new. As the city lights flickered below, the sound of distant music carried through the air. It was the same melody Adrian had played on the piano weeks ago, the one that had ended unfinished. But tonight, as they swayed together under the open sky, he hummed the last notes, completing the song for the first time. Elena looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. You finally finished it, Adrian smiled. Only because you stayed long enough to hear the ending. The camera of the story closed on that moment, two people who had started with a lie, but ended with a truth powerful enough to rewrite both their lives. In the glow of the city and the whisper of spring rain, Adrian Kane kissed his wife again and said softly, "No more contracts, Elena, just forever." And this time, forever was real.